Nowhere to Call Home by Cynthia DeFelice, Chapter 7. Frances hadn't known it would be so dark inside the boxcar. She sat for a while feeling the car rock back and forth, listening to the steady clackety-clack of the train wheels and trying to stop the rapid beating of her heart. To calm herself, she took out her harmonica and began to play. When she paused for a moment, a voice said, "Nice tune." The harmonica fell from Frances's hands and clattered across the rusty metal floor of the boxcar. She froze, swallowing a cry, and peered into the thick, stuffy darkness. The voice had risen so faintly over the steady noise of the train's wheels that she almost wondered if she had imagined it. The car had been empty when she sneaked into it back in the yard, she thought wildly. Hadn't it? Frankie sat still, peering into the darkness and waiting for the voice to speak again. When the train passed through a city or a crossing, a band of light came slanting suddenly between the slats on the side of the car. The whistle blew a warning indicating a crossing of some kind, and in the faint illumination that filtered into the car, Frances was able to make out the vague outline of a figure seated in the corner opposite hers. From the pieces of straw scattered on the boxcar floor and the faint smell of old manure, she figured that the car had been used for shipping livestock. But this was no cow. It was a person. A male person, she was pretty sure, and not very old. He hadn't sounded menacing, or even unfriendly, but it set her nerves on edge all the same, the way the voice had come out of nowhere. And why was he just sitting there, so still and quiet? Frances stared and stared at the shadowy shape in the corner, but it offered no other clues. Whoever he was, he didn't seem inclined to talk anymore. The eerie silence stretched on and on. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, Frances cleared her throat, and making her voice as deep as possible, she said, "Who's there? I thought this car was empty except for me." She waited, holding her breath. "I figured as much," the voice replied after a moment. There was a pause. Then he added in the same slow, almost lazy voice, "If you'd known I was here, you'd likely not have told me so much." What was he talking about? She hadn't told him a thing. She'd merely been fooling around with the harmonica, playing a tune, making it up as she went along. "What do you mean?" she asked suspiciously. "I never said a word." "Didn't have to," he said. "That was pretty near the saddest, most lonesome-sounding song I ever heard." Frances shifted uncomfortably on the hard floor. The conversation was making her feel peculiar. "This boxcar is about as black as midnight," he went on, thoughtfully. "But you was filling it up with blue." A sudden rush of tears flooded Frances's eyes, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid them. "Been on the rods long?" the voice asked. "Beg your pardon?" asked Frances. "How long you been on the drag?" Frances didn't answer. She didn't want to appear stupid, but this person certainly asked some strange questions. "Mm-hmm," the voice said, as if in agreement with himself. "Thought so. A punk." "A punk?" Frances repeated. "A kid." "I guess," said Frances. "I'm 12. Immediately she wished she'd lied and said she was older. Being a boy made her feel safe. Being an older boy would have felt even safer. "Same age I was when I ran off 3 years ago," said the voice. So he was 15, Frances thought. "Green as grass I was, just like you. But say, you snuck past that bull just like a pro fish." Whoever this person was, he'd already figured out she was green as grass, so Frances decided she had nothing to lose by asking, "What bull, and what do you mean, pro-fesh?" "Bull, a railroad cop. A pro-fesh is a professional hobo, like me," he added and laughed. Frances was thinking about being on the road for 3 years. It seemed like an awfully long time. The voice went on. "Started out thinking I'd ride west, find me one of them thousands of jobs I heard was out there. Figured I'd be a millionaire by the time I was 15. He went on with another laugh. "What happened?" Frances asked. He didn't answer. A few minutes passed. Frances had the feeling the boy was thinking back over those years, trying to remember, trying to figure out what had happened. "You got a name?" he asked suddenly. Frances hadn't expected the question. Not at that moment, anyway, and she wasn't prepared. But she did know she couldn't give her real name. When she didn't get off the train in Chicago, Aunt Bushnell would report her missing, wouldn't she? And people, maybe even the police, would be looking for her. Frances's mind raced, trying to think of a boy's name. "Frankie," she blurted at last. Stupid, she thought. Stupid to say her own name, even if it was only a nickname her family never used. She wished she could take it back, but it was too late. "What's yours?" she asked. "Stew pot," he said. Frances could hear the grin in his voice. On account of in the jungle, you can always find me right near the food." The jungle? Frances wondered if the boy was poking fun at her, or was maybe just plain crazy. Food seemed like a fairly safe topic of conversation, however, so she said, "I've got some food with me if you're hungry." "Hey now, there's some good news," said Stewpot. "I feel like a regular Johnny Hollowlegs." Frances shook her head in the darkness, bewildered by this boy's strange way of talking, but she was glad to have the company and happy to share her food. She heard Stewpot get up and walk across the car, then felt a rush of cool wind as he slid open the door. "It's not so cold," he said, "and with the light from the moon coming in, we'll be able to see our grub." He sat down facing Frances, and she was able to get her first look at him. As she untied the cloth Bridget had filled for her and took out the remaining food, Frances thought that he wasn't bad looking. Even though his freckled face was streaked with dirt and soot, his hair was lighter than hers, and like hers was mostly hidden under a cap. He was wearing a shirt under a pair of overalls and a wool jacket, and on his feet were worn black boots. She didn't have to worry about him looking too closely at her. His eyes never left the food as she took out first the remaining biscuits, then the cheese, some pie, and an apple. He whistled in appreciation when it was spread out on the cloth. "That's quite a handout. What'd you do, hit up an easy mark?" he asked. Frances nodded. It seemed the safest answer. "Help yourself," she offered. He glanced quickly at her as if to make sure she meant it, then reached for a biscuit. The whole thing disappeared in his mouth, and he'd swallowed it before Frances had taken a second bite of hers. Not wanting to talk while she was chewing, she gestured for Stewpot to keep on eating. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his overalls and brought out a knife. Frances gasped and pushed herself up onto her knees. "Take it all," she cried. Stewpot's face held the look of utter bewilderment. Then he laughed. "For cripe's sake, sit down. I ain't gonna bump you or snipe your grub." He held up the knife and slowly, deliberately began to slice the cheese, smiling with sly amusement at Frances as he did. Then he carefully cut the apple and the piece of pie in half. "There," he said. "That suit you?" Frances nodded, feeling so foolish. She wished she could disappear through the floor of the boxcar. Stewpot, however, appeared far too entranced by the sight of the food to concern himself with her embarrassment. He hoisted his half of the piece of pie and shoved it into his mouth all at once. Frances had never seen anyone eat so fast, and could almost hear what Mrs. Bailey would have to say about such manners. Frances had been hungry before, but never like that. "Have the other," she urged, pointing to the remaining half. Stewpot, still chewing, looked at her quickly, as if to say, "You sure?" Then, not needing to be asked twice, he swallowed, took the other piece of pie, and ate it. Frances had some cheese and her half of the apple. When the food was gone, she asked, "Do all hobos have names like yours?" "You mean a moniker like Stewpot?" he answered, sounding surprised. "Most do. I guess a few might use their true names. Can't think of any right at the moment, though." After a pause, he asked, "You haven't got any makings, have you?" "Makins?" Frances repeated. "Cigs, smokes, tobacco. Anything like that?" "No." "Ah, well, too bad for us. After a feed like that, a smoke hits the spot." Frances, who had never smoked anything in her life, didn't answer. There was something else she'd been wondering about. "When you're—" She hesitated, trying to remember the words Stewpot had used. "On the drag, can you just make up any name you like?" she asked. Stewpot nodded. "Or somebody else gives you one. I got my name the first night out. There was a fellow, Murph. He liked to watch out for me, seeing as I was just a punk like you. It was him who called me Stewpot." Frances wished she had been named by a real hobo. She liked the idea of Murph watching out for Stewpot, and allowed herself the small hope that Stewpot might do the same for her. "If you were to give me a name, what would it be?" Frances asked. The question was out before she'd even thought about it, and she felt silly as soon as she'd said it. Why would this boy bother to think of a name for her, a punk kid he'd only just met? But Stewpot chuckled softly, and almost to himself he said, "The way you was playing that harmonica, if I had it to do, I'd call you Blue." "Blue." Frances repeated it to herself. It was odd for a name, but no more odd than Stewpot. She liked it. "Could you?" she asked quickly. "Call me that, I mean. You already got yourself a name, but I like Blue better." Stewpot laughed. "All right, then," he said. "Frankie Blue." "Frankie Blue?" Frances repeated. "That's right. Put 'em together, like. What do you think?" Frances said it again, enjoying the sound of it. Frankie Blue. That was a long way from Frances Elizabeth Barrow. "I like it." "All right, then, Frankie Blue," said Stewpot. play me some more on that mouth box, would you? Frances found the harmonica on the floor, raised it to her lips, and began to play Amazing Grace. It was a song Junius used to play, which always made her feel sad and happy and full of hopefulness all at the same time. While she played, Stewpot slid the door shut and settled back down in the darkness. When she had finished, his voice came once again from the corner, sounding pleased and drowsy. "That's a mighty sweet song, Frankie Blue. Mighty sweet." Frances smiled at the sound of her new name, and began another tune. She played in time with the cadence of the train as it made its way through the night. She played until she could hear the sound of Stewpot's peaceful snoring, until the hypnotic swing of the boxcar rocked her into a deep and dreamless sleep.